Good evening, my name is Christopher, and the claim that I will be responding to is standardized testing negatively affects students. My opponent's four supporting claims are standardized testing is associated with high stakes, standardized testing narrows the curriculum, standardized testing harms the minority community, and finally, standardized testing is costly. My opponent's first supporting claim is standardized testing is associated with high stakes. High stakes meaning high consequences. Firstly, my opponent falsely states information from the Baltimore Sun. He states about 20,000 of 70,000 students failed their first standardized testing, which meant that they weren't going to be allowed to move on to the next level. In actuality, the quotation is about 20,000 of 70,000 school children in grades 1 through 8 failed to meet the standards. They did not fail their standardized testing, but they failed the standards, which is accumulation of their grades, attitude, and possibly standardized testing. So it's insufficient to say that standardized testing will cause someone to be held back a grade just based off this information. This leads on to his second point that, in his first supporting claim, that students who are held back a grade have a higher rate of dropping out. A study from John Lawrence and Anthony Dworkin on an elementary school in Texas is that students who failed the Texas mandatory third grade reading tests were followed through their sophomore year in high school. And it was found that these students, compared to the students that were promoted, over time, the retention persisted over time. And for third graders, the ones that were retained, the average was a 76.6, and the average of the ones who were promoted was a 61.1. Excuse me. My opponent's second supporting claim is that standardized testing narrows the curriculum. Firstly, yes, it may narrow the curriculum, but my opponent offers no reasoning that says that this negatively affects students. Just because it narrows the curriculum does not necessarily mean that students aren't benefiting from it. As stated from the Center for Public Education, teaching to the test can be a good thing. It simply means focusing on essential content and skills, eliminating time-wasting activities that don't produce learning gains, and motivating students to excel. So, narrowing the curriculum will cause students to learn more math, literature, and reading, and they will therefore have better mastery of the topic. And overall, my opponent's third secondary claim is that standardized testing harms the minority community. Firstly, my opponent offers no evidence, testimonial or statistical, to back up his assumptions. And firstly, well, actually, he does post testimonial evidence, but it has no credibility because he states a Harvard professor said that a minority student who is told that they aren't going to do well on a test is therefore not going to do well on a test. So there's no credibility to who this Harvard professor is. We don't know what his profession is, so it is not accurate to base an assumption off of him. Also, on the same article that this was found on, it stated that Steele found that everyone is susceptible to stereotype vulnerability. So it isn't only the minority, but it poses as unbiased. For example, in one experiment, white males unaccustomed to being intellectually stigmatized were told that Asians achieved higher scores than Americans on a math test. This group achieved lower scores than a control group. So basically, standardized testing is unbiased and therefore does not affect the minority community. Lastly, my opponent's fourth and final supporting claim is standardized testing is costly. First of all, my opponent does not relate why standardized testing is costly to how it affects students negatively. And secondly, he makes it sound that $1.7 billion is a lot of money and that it can help students and that pay for new teachers and other activities to enhance their knowledge. But in the same article that he found this information, It says, all told, that number represents 1/4% of all the money spent on education. So really, this is an insignificant number that really standardized testing, the cost of it, does not affect students. So because my opponent spends so much time on his introductory that this allows him does not allow him to go in depth on his evidence for testimonial and statistical evidence. So therefore, his supporting claims are mainly assumptions, and he has no evidence to back it up. Thank you.
All right, well, everything's well organized and easy to follow. I think on the first point, you are pretty direct in presenting a challenge to the advocate's evidence, saying that they have basically presented the evidence out of context or incorrectly, and that it means something that's far different. I do think that you have a good explanation of what the evidence says compared to what the advocate claims it says, but I do think you need to expand a little bit on what that means. Holding somebody back a grade, for instance, is not automatically a result of not meeting the standards, is part of the argument. The argument then you follow up on is this claim that holding people back a grade, the advocate claims that results in their having a lower dropout or higher dropout rate. I could not make sense of the information that you presented there. I'm not sure that it was explained very clearly, so I think you need to be a little bit more careful about how you're presenting the numbers on that. My guess is that you're in essence saying that one group, as long as we made sure that they learned the standards, they had a higher rate of success than if they didn't learn the standards. And I think the argument is that it's related to the standards and not to the students themselves. Okay, say that, make that clear. Like I said, I just was a little bit confused about what the numbers meant on that particular point. On the second point, on the curriculum issue, I think that you have a pretty reasonable challenge here. You've got a nice generic argument that says, look, it forces them to focus on things that are essential and are practical for them to learn. I don't remember what the advocate's argument and evidence on that particular point was. I think that you've got a generic argument here. If the advocate didn't present any information on that point, you should specify that, and then at least you've got some experts who suggest that there is a value versus the assertion from the affirmative or the advocate that doesn't really give us any reason to believe that. On the third point, most of your argument, it gets a little bit twisted, but it basically comes down to the study that you cite says, look, everybody is subjected to this self-fulfilling prophecy thing. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not they're a minority or not. I think your challenge on the Harvard professor, it's okay to say, look, we don't know exactly who this person is. They are cited very vaguely. I don't know that you want to say, Harvard professor, who the hell are they? Well, they're a Harvard professor. I'm sure they're probably qualified in some field, but pointing out that the advocate doesn't specify what field they're qualified in and what this is based on, and that you have a particular study that shows that it's not minority status that produces this result, but it's really just this whole self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing that gets this outcome, and everybody is subject to that. I think that that's a pretty reasonable challenge there. And the fourth point, I like the fact that you're using the advocate's own evidence to suggest, look, this is a really small proportion of what we're spending here, and that it's not all that significant. Plus, I think you want to go back to an earlier argument that says, look, if it's achieving results, that it's worth the expenditure, and that would be one of those places where maybe some additional information about how test scores have gone up, or people, when they focus more on meeting standards, for instance, that they get better results. It would be good to have something like that. I thought that your summary wasn't quite as effective because it felt like you went off track a little bit. Instead of talking about the issues that you would really develop, you kind of got onto some other issues. I did think you did a nice job talking to the audience, though, making contact with us and selling us on your credibility. All right, thank you.